Hello, my name's Stephen Thrower. I was a member of Coil from 1984 to 1993, a period which covered, among many other things, the recording of our aborted music for the Hellraiser soundtrack. Now, Coil began in 1983. It was put together by two guys, John Balance and Peter Christopherson, who had been members of a band called Psychic TV before that. They'd left Psychic TV to form another project, which was Coil. I met them in 1984, and very soon after meeting them, we were in the studio together to record some songs which ended up on the first Coil album called Scatology. Peter already had a great deal of technical ability. He was an early adopter of computer technology, Fairlight recording, which is an early computer musical instrument.
The CMI can be used either to digitally synthesize new sounds or accurately perform acoustic and natural sounds which are digitally memorized directly from a microphone or tape.
So when sampling developed in the early 1980s, and you would hear it on records by people like Peter Gabriel and Kate Bush, he was very keen to get his hands on that technology very early on. And by the time Coil started recording in 1984, the songs were being built up largely using samples. I met Clive Barker in, I think it was 1984. It was either 1984 or 1985. It was around the time that Clive's Books of Blood had started to come out, which were his first published short stories. And at the time, I used to do some part-time work at a shop called Forbidden Planet in London on Denmark Street. And as a result, you would often meet people who came in and out of the shop on a regular basis who would kind of hang out and talk. And some of these people were involved in the film industry, some of them were writers. And among the people that came in when I was working there was Clive Barker, who I recognised immediately because I'd already bought the Books of Blood. Thought they were amazing. I thought he was a really exciting new writer. Hey presto, one day, you know, the guy walks into Forbidden Planet and I find myself in a conversation with him. We start talking about music and it turns out that he's got quite an interesting and unusual taste in music. I said, oh, I should play you something that we've done. I played him some Coil records, some Coil music rather, it wasn't even on record at the time. And he loved it. Clive absolutely adored it. And I think the first thing I played him was a track called The Sewage Worker's Birthday Party, which ended up on the Scatology album. From those two titles, you can probably tell what links them thematically. Very dark and dirty, strange songs about particularly extreme sexual fetishism. Well, Clive, I won't say lapped it up, perhaps that's the wrong phrase in this context, but Clive loved the darkness and the strangeness and the edginess of the material. And he was fascinated by all kinds of sexual extremes, basically. They were elements that were getting pulled into Coil songs all the time. So the more I played him, the more he liked it, until eventually, I think it must have been in '85, he said, well, I'm going to be directing a film from one of my own stories, and it was, I think, the novella, the Hellbound Heart, which, when we saw it, was still in galleys. I don't think it had been published at that point. And he said, I'm going to be directing, I want to direct this story. Would you guys be interested in doing the music? I'd really love you to do the music. Of course, we said yes. We were thrilled about the idea as well. Now, we weren't entirely babes in the wood when it came to film music. Peter Christopherson, Sleazy, had worked very extensively in music video at a very high level. I mean, he was working with Robert Plant, he was working with Rage Against the Machine, Nine Inch Nails, and Mark Almond. So he already had a great deal of experience of matching sound to image and working in both fields, and had a very strong visual sense of his own as well. So when the opportunity came up to score Hellraiser, it seemed that our skill set was sufficiently adapted to that possibility to make it practical to say yes. Now, we had a slightly different vision for the way that the film might be to the film that now everyone can see and the way the film turned out. At the time, Clive's vision for the film was quite a lot darker and a lot stranger, I think, as well. Over time, for various reasons, I think the project mutated and changed and became a little bit more commercial, a little bit more mainstream, although, you know, still obviously with elements from alternative culture that would make it a little spicier than an average mainstream horror film at the time. But I'll give you an example. The design for the Cenobites feature lots of body modification, piercing, and I'm very well with Clive, and Peter showed Clive a big stack of a magazine that he was a collector of at the time called PFIQ, called Piercing Fans International Quarterly. It was a really underground thing. There weren't body piercing shops on your high street. This was something that only went on in a kind of very rarefied sort of specialist arena. Certainly fringe sexuality was where that was sort of taking place. Now, PFIQ had illustrations of the most extreme and startling and unusual body modification. I mean, the one that really sticks in my mind, because it does tend to when you see it, penile bifurcation, if anyone's aware of that term, just means people who are willing to have their penises sliced down from tip to base and then separated into two halves, which are then pinned apart using, body rings, Prince Albert type rings or whatever, and attached to other parts of their body. Now, when you first see these pictures, you're not even aware that this is even possible. This is like a new twist in human sexual behaviour. It's to the point where you're thinking you're not sure if it even counts as sex anymore. It's just a strange, very, very radical, self-willed alteration of the human body. Clive, again, lapped up this material. He was absolutely fascinated. I think he spent a good hour almost not talking, just poring through the magazines and looking at them. So everything that we were sharing at the time in terms of musical ideas, in terms of subject matter, in terms of the shared interest in the extremes of experience, Clive was on board 100%, and it seemed like that we were ideally suited to working on a project together. Once Clive had asked us to do something, and we'd played him a couple of pieces that we'd already done, and said, is this the sort of region that you'd be interested in? There was a track called Cathedral in Flames, which was on the Scatology album. Clive was particularly fond of that. And also, as I say, the Sewage Workers' Birthday Party, that was another one. He said, those two are tracks which I'd really like you to sort of think about as a template, in a way, a kind of oral template for where I'd like the music to go. If you listen to those two pieces, they're not at the more commercial end of the coil scale. They certainly don't, he certainly wasn't asking us to water anything down. He'd chosen one of the most extreme tracks, and one of the most grand, but also one of the strangest tracks as well. The main thing that I remember Clive saying to us was that we had conversations about the kind of approach to soundtracks that we liked, and there were two in particular that we talked about. One was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
What happened was true.
Now, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre has a score that is about as far out and avant-garde as any film that you could think of. And it's not a traditional score by any sense of the term at all. It sets up a series of very disturbing, threatening, ominous textures which build and ebb and flow. And they're not score, they don't score to the image in the way that a normal conventional film score does. They don't create themes and match the actions to what you're seeing on screen. They create a kind of a weather. They add a kind of emotional weather to the film, like a stormy weather into your mind whilst you're watching the film.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. After you stop screaming, you'll start talking about it.
The other thing that Clive liked, and this was his guidance to us about the way that we might work in a more melodic sense, was that he really liked Pino Donaggio's music for Carrie, the Brian De Palma film.
For Carrie, it will be a dream come true. For everyone else, it will be a nightmare. Carrie.
And we listened to that, and of course it is a wonderful, wonderful score. And that does have scenes which match very directly to actions taken in the film. And we talked about the idea of themes for characters and things like this. So there were two ways of doing things on the table, and we felt confident that we could do both. We were accustomed to working with, as I say, electronics, but we were also very accustomed to working with acoustic instruments as well. I played clarinet and saxophone. We had other musicians that we worked with on a regular basis who provided string ensemble material, which we would write using samples and things, and then would have rescored for real instruments. So that was the kind of way we were thinking of working. So we went in the studio. We spent, I think, only a week creating what were essentially demos, but we didn't have something to work to. There was no cut to work to. So consequently, of course, you can't create cues that are kind of fixed without anything to fix them to. So we went into the studio, we spent a week recording, and those recordings were done to find melodic themes, harmonic relationships, textures that we thought would be suitable, that we could then play to Clive and say, do you like this, do you like this, do you like this? If you like these, then we'll work these up into something more complex. What we actually have in the recordings that we did in this rather almost tentative early stage that we had, we developed what was intended to be a theme, a title theme. And we developed another piece that was essentially brooding, things are about to happen, something terrible is about to happen sort of moments. And also there was a piece that was designed to accompany the opening of the box, which we'd not even seen as a piece of footage at that point, we just knew it from the script. Unfortunately, having done that initial work, and as I say, it was only about a week in the studio, it wasn't very long, before we got any further expanding and developing those pieces, much less tying them to the picture. They came over, they sent a team over, or a couple of people over from the States. And when those guys saw the material that Clive had shot and met with Clive and talked with him, I think then they woke up to the fact that it did have commercial potential. They saw a way in which this was actually going to be a genuine financial horse worth backing with a bit more money. Now at that point I know that there was some difficulty with certain effects scenes that they were having, that some of the effects had been shot and they had not turned out as desired. And I don't think the effects people were happy, and Clive wasn't happy, no one was happy. And there was everyone was in a bit of a state about what to do about that. I think New World solved that problem by saying, well, we can give you more money, you can improve this, you can improve that, you can have more shooting time. We'd just like to make a few changes and a few tweaks of our own if we're going to give you the money. And I think my understanding is that that's where the break came with us. New World didn't want us. As far as they were concerned, we were some sort of weirdo, sort of avant-garde trip that Clive was into, but they didn't believe in it. I think they must have placed Clive in a rather difficult position, saying, we love your picture, we believe in it, we can add more money to it, it's going to be a hit, da-di-da-di-da, but these guys, we're not sure about this. And here's our guy, a chap called Christopher Figg, who did the score that everyone knows, which works with the film in the way that it does. It's a much more orchestral and much more conventional score than the one that we would have ended up doing. We felt that the music had enough intrinsic quality as it stood, even though it was only partially completed, that as long as it was given a bit of a polish, that we could actually release it as we did, the unreleased themes to Hellraiser. Initially that came out as a 10-inch single. 3 of the most finished, complete pieces were placed on side 1 of that record. There's a slight confusion. Side 2 features some of Peter's music for TV commercials and other projects. Audio jingles, really, for washing up liquid and things like this. So side 2 has got nothing to do with the Hellraiser music at all. So yeah, don't listen to side 2 thinking that it was ever intended to be in the film, because you might get rather confused about what the hell we thought we were doing. And then a bit later on, when the CD came out, which was about 88, 89, I think, the CD featured another 3 or 4 pieces which were less finished. They were among the pieces that had been begun but which were not deemed quite ready enough for when we did the vinyl version. But there was so much demand and so much interest from Coil fans about the project that it was evident that there was a justification for putting sort of the sketches out as well. After the Coil Hellraiser debacle, we didn't entirely go our separate ways. I don't think John and Peter ever saw Clive again. I still saw Clive socially until he moved to the United States, which I think must have been around 1989. He was very supportive of my early project, which was the first magazine I ever published, called Eyeball, a magazine about European sex and horror movies. The emphasis of the magazine was always either the art film end of the scale or the extreme exploitation end of the scale. The only stuff I wasn't interested in covering was the mainstream in the middle, essentially, but you could have both extremes I was really interested in. And Clive actually helped me financially with the early stages. In fact, he put some money into the first issue of Eyeball. So Clive helped me financially at that time, and I'm immensely grateful for that. That was a nice leg up to get started. Some of my fondest memories of Clive are of the glee that he took in sharing with us and sharing with me, his enjoyment of the extremes of subject matter that we were all drawn to. This was not some sort of dour, Mac-wearing sort of miserablest sort of creed where everyone was sort of trying to bum themselves out with the horrors of human existence as much as possible. It was a kind of a jauntier nihilism than that, really. There was a lot of amusement and a lot of pleasure in these extraordinary extra levels of consciousness that you might aspire to and that you might visit. The tone and the tenor of our interactions with Clive on the subject of, these body modification, of extremes of sexual behaviour, was always in a spirit of fun and exploration and enjoyment, and the thrill of the unusual, the thrill of the forbidden, and the camaraderie that builds up between people when you realise that you're sharing this bizarre journey with someone else who's getting as much fun out of it and is finding it as compulsive as you are. So for the period that we were on the same page, it was a very, very enjoyable period, and Clive was a really great sort of guy to be around and to share that with.